following program brought to you in part by Hemp Shield and CanIHelpYou.care.
We're here to celebrate cannabis and Rick Smith and the awesome activist he was. And we're right now going to celebrate the fact that NORML, the granddaddy of cannabis reform organizations in the United States, we've got NORML represented right here all over this table. It's fantastic. You'd really have to look far and wide to find this many awesome people on this stage right now. And I know you don't want to listen to me anymore, because if you're like me, and I know I am, I should probably get off the stage. But we've got Danica Noble.
Hi.
Colt DeMorris.
Hello.
Joy Beckerman. Kevin Oliver. John Conroy. And soon, Madeline Martinez. But for right now, I'm going to turn it over to the NORML panel. Thank you, you guys.
John, were you going to kick it off?
You want me to?
Yeah, do it.
Can you hear me? I'm kicking it off because I think I'm the oldest guy here, probably. So that takes us back.
You represent the country.
I am from just north of here in Canada, and what happened with us was about 74, 75, I was the lawyer for a community law office that part of its responsibility was doing general public sort of issues that were arising, and people were coming to me wanting to do smoke-ins and all sorts of other things, and NORML US was just being formed in those days, and so I suggested that maybe we should have a official lobby group in Canada like NORML USA, and I was in touch with Keith Stroop and others in San Francisco at the time, and they gave me permission to use the NORML name. And so we incorporated a National Canada Corporation, Nonprofit Canada Corporation, and enlisted some lawyers from across the country to be on the board, and then started forming chapters and having members. Now, again, in Canada, in the early mid-60s, we had maybe 600, 800 people a year getting busted. And then in 72, it went to 10,000. And by 78, it was 50,000. So this was in that period when things were suddenly taking off, and people were getting busted for simple possession and smoking a joint outside a bar and things like that. So people were motivated to become members and to join and to try and change the law. We also had the Ledane Commission in Canada, which first reported in 72. It had 3 different reports, and it recommended legalization. It recommended that there be no simple possession offense at all. It recommended, I think, a maximum penalty of 5 years for trafficking. Every single political party in Canada recommended that there should be legalization, at least of simple possession, but it never happened. We came up to the brink, I think, 4 times. NORML thrived, though, for quite a period of time, but then I'm from British Columbia. And British Columbia is a bit of a cocoon in Canada compared to the rest of the country. And it wasn't too long, I would say almost the early 80s, where everybody in BC thought it was legal. And so it became harder and harder to get people to join NORML or contribute funds and this sort of thing. But nevertheless, we plodded along, and we then realized that if we were going to change any laws in Canada, we had to move everything to Ontario and Quebec, the 2 provinces in the east with the largest population. And so we shifted things down there, and various different people were involved at different times, and we had different, get-togethers and so on. I would have to once in a while rescue the situation because some of the members sometimes started to get involved in activities that were of questionable legality.
No.
And so I had to rescue. Keith would call me and say, "Oh, I've heard this." So I'd have to quickly go back.
No.
And anyway, it sort of has evolved, and we still have a group of people in Toronto who are actively involved. Abby Sampson is the acting executive director at the moment, and there's a group there. But again, no paid executive director, no significant funding, so we're all just sort of chipping in when we can to keep everything going. But I'm pleased to say that it has had, and Mr. Trudeau, whose father was the Prime Minister back in the 72 period I was talking about, and who had introduced legislation that we call absolute and conditional discharges, which were there for people who had simple possession records to try and wipe them out sooner. But here we were 45 years later, and his son, the Prime Minister, credits NORML Canada with part of the decision to legalize. So come 2 months from yesterday, it will be legal in Canada to possess up to 30 grams. You'll be able to grow 4 plants per household, up to unlimited size, and you'll be able to go to a store and buy it, a retail store. Very quickly, medical is on a much different thing. The feds have kept the medical project the way it's been going now for some years, and the important distinction is that we became a constitutional democracy only in 1982, and our charter provides the right to life, liberty, and the security of your person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with what we call the principles of fundamental justice. And our litigation on the medical has led to a situation where it's recognized that the government had to provide a medical exemption for medically approved patients because to do otherwise would result in a violation of the security of their person in an arbitrary manner, and therefore not consistent with principles of fundamental justice. So medical patients are protected to the extent that their constitutional rights are involved, whereas recreational patients are not. But at the same time, the weird thing is there's going to be stores for the rec folks and no stores for the medical folks. So we're still possibly going to court in a few months on that whole issue of trying to establish medical dispensaries. Because the other important thing, Canada is not going to legalize edibles till next year, but medical patients, as a result again of a case we took to the Supreme Court of Canada, are entitled to possess and use cannabis in any of its forms. So the medical dispensary, the Compassion Club, is a distinct type of a supply process compared to the recreational. So we'll be carrying on. Hopefully now we'll get some of these rich folks who are the licensed producers and the illegal dispensaries have been making 20 grand a day of every 420 I hear. So hopefully they'll start to contribute some money, and we'll be able to get NORML back on a good solid foundation, because we're going to have to be in their face for quite a few more years to make them understand that it's okay to smoke on a boat. It's okay for a young person to see a marijuana plant. Nothing will happen. There's some of the just crazy rules that they have. But hey, we're moving forward. And finally, it's going to be legal October 17th.
Woo!
Right.
And I hope most people won't need more than 30 grams or 4 plants. But there are still lots of people complaining who say they'll want more.
So I was thinking, we've got Canada, we've got 2 members of the board of directors for NORML National, US, exciting. And then perhaps you traveled the furthest? Texas, El Paso NORML. So Colt, do you want to give us a little rundown of Texas real quick?
Sure. So I founded El Paso NORML in 2014. We kicked off, actually got the idea to start the chapter because I got into my activism when my mom passed from cancer. So I started doing research, and I came across Dallas-Fort Worth NORML, and when I did that, I looked for an El Paso one. There wasn't one, and so I started it. And come to find out, El Paso happens to be the first place in the nation to have a law prohibiting the sale and possession of cannabis. And it happened 22 years before the federal prohibition in 1915. So basically we're trying to end prohibition when it started. Since we kicked off, we kicked off in 2014. In January of 2014. In February of 2014, I met with my state representative, Representative Joe Moody. And when I met with him at the time, Washington, D.C. was going through their decriminalization process. And I took him the bill that they were using. And I said, if this is good enough for our nation's capital, this is good enough for Texas. And he said that he left that meeting with me. At the time, I had a wife. She passed away 2 years ago as well from cancer. And so at the time, she was sick, and so I was fighting, to keep her out of jail, and we were fighting at the time for a medical bill. But he left that meeting and told his staff, give me a reason why I shouldn't file this bill. And they couldn't. So the next legislative session in 2015, that bill was written for Texas to go with our statutes, and he's filed it. Since then, he's been the most active representative in the state of Texas for marijuana reform. We've had some other bills filed that were passed. That bill actually passed out of committee and was going to the House floor the first session that it was filed. The second session, it went a little bit further. It still hasn't made it to the House floor. There's reasons why. Certain senators held it back the first time. Certain House members held it back the first time from hitting the calendar, and we ran out of time the second time. But the bill's advancing. We're a young chapter. We've only been around for 4 years, but we don't have a lot of members, but we have a strong political presence. And at the state level, we work with our Congressman Beto O'Rourke, who's actually running against Ted Cruz right now, trying to take Ted Cruz out.
Heard of it.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it. So I've worked with him. He was at my first meeting, along with 230 people from El Paso. Yes.
The first meeting, 230 people showed up?
Yeah. So we had two.
Can you tell me how you started that?
So
free weed. He said free weed.
Our first meeting was January 11th, 2014. We had Congressman Beto O'Rourke there. We had State Senator Jose Rodriguez there. I don't know if you've ever heard of Kinky Friedman. He ran for Texas governor, but he's like an old cowboy, cigar guy.
But how did you promote it? How did you literally start that chapter with that kind of response?
El Paso is a very democratic city. We're like the most democratic place in the state of Texas.
Flyers?
Not many.
I'm just going to throw in the NORML brand might have had a little something to do with it as well.
Did they give you email addresses too?
So in 2000 and email addresses?
Yeah. Sometimes, to jump ahead.
Oh, the 230 people?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we had a sign-in sheet. Yeah. Okay, so
Amazing.
What had happened was in September prior, there was a drug conference going on in El Paso that involved congressional officials from Mexico, and along with Beto O'Rourke, and at the time Alan St. Pierre was invited to go, but he couldn't make it.
Heard of him?
So he couldn't make it, so they sent Cheyenne Weldon, Texas NORML's director at the time, to go. Well, they knew I was trying to start a chapter at the time, so Sean from Dallas connected us, and we did a little meetup and had 30 people there. And we were just talking about it, and at the time I needed 2 more board members. One I actually picked up at that meeting. So right after that, we got it. I had a news reporter do a whole length article that you can find on kvia.com in El Paso. They did a rundown of the meeting the day before. The next day, 230 people showed up.
Shit, yeah.
Media exposure.
Yeah.
Wow, and motivated.
So, and that whole year we were, our marijuana march, the first march ever that we did with the Global Marijuana March, had over 130 people. That was in the newspaper and on the news. We blew up the first year and had a lot of media exposure, a lot of media attention. But then my wife was sick at the same time. And when she started going through her problems, even that had a lot of media exposure. And then when she passed, they even did an article about the director of El Paso NORML's wife passing. So, you know, we've had a lot of exposure to the chapter, and we've had a big political presence. We're a small chapter, but we've got a big political presence.
You carry a big stick.
That's right.
Amazing story, amazing call.
All right, Kevin,
Me?
tell us.
My name's Kevin Oliver. I'm the executive director of the state affiliate of Washington NORML, and I'm also honored to be on the national board of directors of such a well-known reform organization. And I first want to thank Hempfest for this platform, both here in the Hemposium, as well as the, as well as the 27, 28 years that they've been an activist advocate incubator, per se. Because honestly, when I first got involved in NORML, I came to Hempfest, and it was now 17 years ago. And that's when I first met Keith, and what was his name? Alan?
Alan, yeah.
I'm kidding. And so, you know, because of Hempfest and my exposure to the national executive director and founder, we built a relationship and rapport over the last 15 years or 14 years, and since then I was, after legalization, by osmosis and being in the right place at the right time and maybe doing some of the right things, I was allowed to be voted onto the board of NORML, and now I've served 2 terms. And I've got a 3rd vote coming up in a few years. So it's backstory. Washington NORML was founded in about 1988 or so, the late 80s, by Paul Stanford, who some of you may know as the THC Foundation. Over the years, since then, he's of course moved to Oregon and gone on to do other things. There was kind of a lull in I would say forward movement of any actual law reforms here in Washington for a while, and then things really started to pick up, I would say in about 2011, when Sensible Washington launched an initiative to just strip marijuana from the RCWs of Washington, and at the same time a new approach Washington was launched, and that's ultimately what we know as I-502 today. In keeping with NORML's mission statement, you know, I-502 accomplished several things. It keeps people out of jail for personal use. It allows for the controlled quality controls in the production of marijuana in terms of pesticides and you know, molds, etc. It allows consumers to know what they're smoking, where it came from. It allows accountability for any, you know, bad products that get out there. All things that were not available in the black market or medical market even, that wasn't as regulated. One could say that NORML's fight has turned into a model of we want taxation and regulation, and to some extent that's true, because that ultimately is a definition of legalization. But here in Washington, as everyone here is probably painfully aware, we're the only state of 9 that doesn't have home grow, and that's unacceptable to a consumer lobby. And ultimately, we are a consumer advocacy organization, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we are the only consumer advocacy organization. And post-legalization, our role in Washington's rollout, well, we've got a lot of friends in the legislature. We always have. Since legalization, the regulatory agency, the Liquor Control Board, has been trying to do what they think is the right thing in terms of marijuana, but they literally got legal marijuana dumped on their lap. And so I can't really blame them for not knowing what they are doing. But there are several industry organizations, some better than others, that are trying to give them direction. We're the only consumer lobby at the table of the Liquor Control Board. We have a representative who lives in Olympia, so it's very convenient. We operate under a state affiliate umbrella, and we have several chapters in the state. that operate more or less autonomously, but when we need to communicate, we do. And I'm not the guy that's going to have monthly meetings and try to pay a salary on membership dues. That's just not me. Our actual membership would include, I would say, if you talk about the chapters, the chapter leaders, the chapter directors, and the board members here in Washington, a dozen or so people. But the people that I'm talking about have so much influence in the legislature and the regulatory agencies and the organizing and the media. Like Danica just won the Hempfest Activist of the Year award yesterday, and she's probably the best organized chapter in the state as far as meetings and bringing people together on a monthly basis and really doing the hard work. We have, like I said, a Thurston County chapter who is very attentive to our legislative needs and our regulatory attendance. I live on the eastern side of the state. And in continuing in this experiment of legalization, my wife and I went ahead and signed up for I-502. So luckily we had some idea of what the legal marijuana market would look like based on NORML conferences around the country. They were constantly talking about, when policy reforms, what's the price of wholesale marijuana going to be. So things are very, very, very inexpensive when it comes to wholesale pot now, but we saw that coming. So we're glad to be part of this experiment, but it's a misnomer that anyone in the industry is making millions of dollars right now. And there are several people in the industry who would like to see home grow. In keeping, again, with NORML's mission statement, we want home grow in Washington. We have lobbied for home grow in Washington. We're the only organization out of any industry organization that's actually pushing home grow as an agenda in Olympia and with the Liquor Control Board, who for some reason thinks they have purview over home grow. But they're really just trying to protect their tax revenue. And believe it or not everyone in the industry and most of the industry groups, majoritively, are against home grow, if you can believe that. I mean, you can go to a bar and buy beer and drink it. You can go to a store and buy alcohol and take it home, and you can brew your own beer. There would be no profit loss with home grow. In fact, it would probably just turn more people on a pot and realize, I can't grow marijuana because spider mites,
Space, time.
Yeah. So we're not. So while Washington, when I listen to Colt, like Joy was saying, it kind of gives us chills, because there was a time when talking about marijuana was a little more edgy, and it really did bring a lot more moss to the flame. And now when people ask, well, why have a Hempfest? It's kind of like, well, what's NORML? Why NORML? Well, because we're tweaking the laws, and if we leave it just to industry to tweak, it's not going to be good for consumers. Let me put it this way. The industry to this day has not paid for any of the legalization in any of the states. And the people that have paid for it, the angels, are not involved in the industry, who are, let's call them sharks, okay? There's just, the board of directors of NORML includes a handful of people who have literally paid millions and millions of dollars for every state to legalize, including our own Rick Steves, who's on the National Board of Directors, and Justin Hartfield, Randy Quest, yeah, and so what NORML does is fight for the right of marijuana to get in the hands of consumers, and we do not try to profit on the capitalization or commodification or commercialization of marijuana. And in fact, we're coming up on our 50-year anniversary. It says 48 on my tag here, but that's wrong.
2020 will be 50.
Yeah. 2020?
Yeah,
It's currently 48.
79, 70?
70. The Controlled Substances Act of 70. That's
That's
how I
right.
remember.
All right. Marijuana. So it'll be, we're coming up on our 50-year anniversary, and our founder, Keith Stroop, is still an active member. I can't keep up with him. When we go out to dinner, I just don't know what. That guy is just amazing, yeah. And what we have determined at going, are you on the planning committee? Joy and I sit on the board of directors together. We're talking about what the 50-year rollout's going to look like, and where does NORML go from here. So let's say legalization was enacted tomorrow, all across the states, and all of a sudden pot's legal. We're still the only consumer lobby.
Got a lot of work to do.
Keith's inspiration came from Ralph Nader, one of the nation's leading consumer advocates. NORML's not ever going to be an industry shill. We're always going to be a consumer advocate. We're always going to fight for the rights of people to smoke marijuana without going to jail. I've seen the growing pains of legalization firsthand. I've known people who used to grow a little pot. They were medical patients that paid their bills, and that's all they did for 20 years. Now they're suffering. I see people who have thrown their life savings into getting licensure to become legal marijuana producers or processors or retailers. Now they're bankrupt. So it really is a difference between angels and sharks, and we are a middle ground with our eyes on the prize of legalizing marijuana for consumers and trying to make that transition as smooth as possible for all of the people involved. Again, we're not an industry shill, we never will be, and I say that, I hope, with the full backing of the board of directors, and I'm willing to stake my seat at the board on that. And we are here to hopefully get home grow, personal use lounges, and one of the most important things we're working on as a national network with separate state organizations is, and I think Danica, you're involved in that too, is the drug testing awareness. It's like, hey, if you can smoke marijuana legally in your state and there's no impairment, maybe you should let your people smoke it at work. You know,
I think we also need to mention expungement here.
It's all
because that needs to be under all.
Yeah, absolutely.
I need to talk for a minute about Washington. And so if you heard Kevin said in 2011 things started picking up around here, I'm not saying it's because that's when NORML Women of Washington started. I'm just saying that's when NORML Women of Washington started. And I was just someone who got really fired up hearing about a woman who had her baby, newborn baby, ripped out of her arms in a legal medical state. And I told my husband, I'm getting involved. I'm going to become a pot activist. He was like, what? And you know what? It feels so good. And it feels so great to be here. Thanks, Hempfest. Oh,
She started
Hempfest.
law students for a sensible drug policy at Georgetown Law, so he kind of wasn't shocked by this.
Well, so all I did to start it, I was asking you, is I literally just set up a place to have a meeting, told NORML I was going to do it, and they sent an email invite to all these folks, and women started showing up. I went for a women's angle because, first of all, it's about fucking time, and second of all, women have different perspectives and different ways of saying things, and if we look back in how prohibition ended to alcohol, the organization of women was critical. And so NORML Women, we are based in part off those organizations, and when we go to our state legislature and when we go to the governor or to the attorney general and we're like, we're women, we're mothers, we're wives, we're pillars in our communities, and this drug war is a failure and it's making it worse for everyone. So we found it's been really effective. We've had 2 annual lobby days in Olympia. They know us there. We do all kinds of branding, and when we see these people off, they know us. And we have been talking about home grow there all the time. We came when there wasn't a bill, and we said, we'll be back next year. We want home grow. And last year we were there, and we were testifying, and we said, let's get it done. It didn't get done. We'll be there as long as it takes to get home grow, to get expungement. And NORML Women just launched 2 more chapters. So Spokane has a chapter that's meeting, and Olympia. And actually, we get contacted all the time by women who are like, I'd love to give back to my community, I'd love to be involved, and I'd love to do it with some more women. The sisters that I have found that now just span the entire nation and down to Texas with Claire and with Joy in New York is amazing. So I think that the organization is incredible. The work to demand that justice stays a part of this is the most critical work, because it won't be the industry who necessarily does that. It's the good actors certainly will be, and corporate responsibility is something that we love. So we love to support Hempfest sponsors, and we love to patronize our favorite places. The only other thing I wanted to say is, it wasn't that long ago that we were the ones who were feeling the very worst brunt of injustice of this terrible, terrible policy. And immigrants have long felt the brutish decisions. They were vilified when marijuana first became illegal. And now as we've had all these gains, immigrants are still feeling some of the most horrible pains of nonsensical, non-compassionate policy. And while there are a million points of injustice, all are valuable to attack. There are some that are so terrible that you need to disrupt your life. You need to get uncomfortable. And for me, that is border separation and families being separated. And I just want to make the cause and the case for why our community needs to stand with that community. First of all, it's not that far away. The very conditions that all those families are fleeing for their lives, those lethal conditions were made by U.S. international drug policy. Those families are fleeing from their lives because of this failed U.S. drug policy. At the border, some of the 450 children who are ineligible for reunification with their parents and are sitting in the cold ice rooms of these detention facilities are ineligible for reunification because their parents have minor drug offenses. People, that happens whether you're an immigrant or not across the United States, and it's something we just can't stand for. So when we say that we're at a record all-time high of support for legalization, 95% United States wide, 95%, that means as a movement, we've been successful in getting other people to pick up our cause and to join our struggle against injustice, and our community needs to stand with the immigrant community right now. Now we're going to hear from Joy, who's got everything good to say, and also we'll be channeling Keith Stroop.
Totally. And Joy Beckerman here. I recently moved to New York after 19 glorious years in this incredible bubble where we live in the future here in Seattle. I heard of Seattle Hempfest way back in the early 90s when I had, hello Bailey, our lobbyist, our NORML lobbyist right here. We love you, Bailey Hirschberg. And yeah, I owned a hemp store in Woodstock, New York in the early 90s, and folks would come into that hemp store that may or may not have been from the West Coast and traveling across the country for various business reasons, and they would say to me, hey, because we were doing these little tiny hemp fests, 2 words, hemp fest, and they were like a hemp burger and some pipes, and if you didn't like hemp burgers, you were going to go hungry, and some music, right? And people would say, do you know Vivian McPeak? He and the Peace Heathens? This was in the early 90s. They're doing this thing called Seattle Hemp Fest. You should meet him. And finally, at a Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam in 1995, I met this Vivian McPeak and said, man, we've got work to do together. And it's just been a tremendous joy living in Seattle, working with Hempfest, working with NORML, which is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. That's the acronym for NORML. It was formed in 1970 by Keith Stroop in Washington, D.C. in direct response to marijuana being included as a Schedule I drug in the Controlled Substances Schedule. It was the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. So we are going on 50 years. NORML to me has always been, and I sold even in my hemp stores, little embroidered NORML shirts back then. It has always been a beacon of freedom, a beacon of rights, a beacon of justice, sort of the sunshine in the dark cloud of prohibition. I'm blessed. If I had known to be afraid of what I was doing back then, or even now, I wouldn't have done it, but I had no idea. I don't have that fear chip. And apparently neither did Keith Stroop. The NORML brand, I just wanted to tell you how it has grown, how this organization has developed over these years. We're in at least 17 different countries, and the angels that Kevin discusses, one of whom is John, but the board of directors, you can watch as we go around, and some of us, all we have is our chutzpah and our speaking to contribute. Others, for whatever reason, they've generated some wealth in their lives, but you can go around the board meeting, and we need, $50,000 for that, and we have 20 board members, and someone will say, I'll put in 20, I'll put in 10, I'll put in 5, and boom, that problem is solved. We have other angels that come in and and contribute in large ways. But we now have an email list and it's growing all the time, of over 170,000. We have a social media presence that is tremendous and growing all the time, because now all the folks that used to be afraid to make their voices heard, they're getting empowered. In fact, they want to be a part. In fact, we sort of had done away with memberships a bit. We'd have these membership drives, but there was this thinking in NORML that folks wanted to remain anonymous. But we were starting to get wind up here in Washington. No, people actually want to be card-carrying proud members of NORML, and we brought that membership back. And that has also, membership dues can never be your #1 source of revenue, but it is also a good source of revenue for us. And all of our action alerts also tend to generate folks. They're very happy right now and feeling purpose in their lives. Cannabis and legalization is bringing purpose to people's lives, and it's amazing to me how many folks don't have purpose, and they want it, and they want to feel a part, and we are reaping the benefits of all of that emotional energy and even some of that financial energy. But memberships are $35 a year, and you can go on NORML.org to join. There's a join tag there now. So we have also, over the years, been able to get an incredible executive team. We have a permanent location in Washington, well-staffed at this point. We have an incredible executive director, Eric Altieri, who has brought us to new heights and lengths and organizations that are tremendous, as our political director, Justin Streckel, an absolute genius of a whirlwind of a lobbying wizard who is a beacon of social and political justice, and it's this brilliant intellectual who is always pounding the pavement in DC with the feds. And then our chapter organizer, chapter coordinator, Kevin Mamalji. And I want to talk to you about the tools that have been developed over the years that exist for everybody now. One is called the Action Network. It's a federated electronic system, much like the AFL-CIO uses, where we can break it into regional chapters. And this Action Network allows you to do targeted email campaigns, fundraisers, events. Chapters can also post their events on our very well-trafficked Facebook page. These are tremendous tools. Also, they have the Help Us Help You guide, monthly calls, sometimes weekly calls, and if there is something special going on, there's going to be a chapter call about it. These are coordinated, prompt, highly organized efforts. Also,
like, didn't they get to work with, she almost ran for president. She's our favorite senator, Elizabeth Warren. Did we have a call with her developing the legislation that then she dropped?
Yeah, I was on the conference call with her and Gardner for this latest.
Gardner.
No, it was the Gardner that launched Trump's from Colorado.
The Colorado Gardner.
Very, very supportive.
So these
killer phone calls.
Yeah, I mean they're totally amazing that we have these tools to organize people. Understand that none of this happens without organization and motivation, and also we have tremendous access to the media. The media contacts NORML now. NORML barely has to reach out, although they have their list for op-ed pieces and so on and so forth. These candidate packets are very important. They give on top of the Citizen Lobbying Guide, which is available to everybody at NORML.org, which is a one-stop shop. The candidate packets give out polling information, sample text for policy platforms, suggested stump speech paragraphs, key points for the benefits of adult use and medical marijuana legalization, myth busters, and how marijuana combats the opioid crisis, and of course, racial injustice, which is how we're also gaining a lot, thank goodness, of support with that data, which is sad and intolerable, and when presented to common sense congressional representatives makes a lot of sense, and they want to get on board with us. So that NORML.org, again, being a one-stop shop, I want you to know we've got the Take Action tab. You get on Take Action, you're going from, you can attack, in an hour, you could go through every state and everything happening in federal and support it all or oppose it all. This Take Action tab is tremendous. State laws, I have never seen a database this accurate and this filled with facts about every kind of penalty and use and limit and what kind of cannabis we're talking about. about? Are we talking about adult use versus medical versus CBD only versus industrial hemp? Understand around 400 interns apply for 4 coveted spots every year for NORML, for the executive, for our executive level. And these incredible folks keep these tremendous resources up to date for folks to see all of this information on a state level. Congressional report cards. Go right in there and find out how your congressional representatives are voting or supporting or opposing these efforts. We'll give them an A through an F, and we'll tell you why there. These fact sheets, our star, Dr. Paul Armentano, who is our unbelievable deputy director, rock star of, he won't let a single, if you're going to tell a lie about him, about cannabis in any of its forms, you better get ready to deal with Dr. Paul Armentano. So our fact sheets on everything from, teen access and car accidents and opioid use and all of public health and safety, all of these things are there for our fact sheets for everybody to access on NORML.org. And again, some of our just tremendous efforts, we helped form the first Congressional Cannabis Caucus, which is constantly growing, the first ever Senate Marijuana Working Group. We host educational events in DC all the time. We help introduce and draft legislation for the feds, and some other notable reform efforts that I want to share with everybody. And you may have known in 2014, Earl Blumenauer, tremendous hero out of Oregon, put forth with some other folks the Path Forward, Rethinking Federal Marijuana Policy, a tremendous compendium. We help them update that constantly. The AAA Honesty Campaign, thank you. And that, of course, is the American Automobile Association, which came out with paranoid, hysterical, non-scientific, non-fact-based data about the increase in car accidents with legalization. Total bullshit. We've sent over 8,500 letters to them. We're now working closely with the American Legion, who at one point, was only sort of soft supporting, and now flat out is supporting language for the Veterans Equal Rights Act. We help with the ONDCP, Opioids Commission outreach. We're constantly updating the emerging clinical applications for cannabis, and again, our fact sheet. So it's a one-stop shop. NORML.org remains to this day not only the beacon of light and the beacon of hope and justice and freedom that it has always been for me, but it is the most well-organized, well-tooled consumer and only consumer-based rights group in America, and again in 17 countries. And we would just hope that you would join our efforts. We've got Washington NORML here, we've got NORML Women of Washington, and we'd hope that you join our efforts. And if you have been a part of NORML in the past and have gone astray, come back. We're stronger, we're better than ever, we want you more than ever, and we're doing better work than ever. Thank you, everybody.
All right, every panelist, you've got 45 seconds. Closing thoughts. Who wants to go first? John.
Well, I think it's worth remembering, just to, on two of the points that have been raised, that all of our drug laws were based on racism against the Chinese in the early days. The opium dens, certainly Vancouver, all the way down this west coast. So immigration and then labor surpluses historically always seem to lead to some of these things. On the home grow thing, we managed to, they tried to take away the right to home grow for medical patients. They can grow a number of plants, depends upon your dosage. And we, the police and fire people and so on, tried to say fire, mold, public safety, all these sorts of things. And so we've got a record in the Allard trial where we trashed the police and the fire people, and the judge said they were biased, found that they were not credible at all, and that growing at home can be done. All of these problems, especially when it's legal and people don't cut corners and they get permits and they make sure it's safe electrically, blah, blah, blah. He said it's easy to do all of these things and do it safely. We're going to have an issue maybe in apartments and condos and small areas, but let's not forget there's bloom boxes and all kinds of engineered solutions for that. And so people need to remember that. And the biggest thing I think that we always have to keep focusing on is there's always this desire to prohibit. And so it's a good one with the landlords and so on to say to them, look, if you prohibit, they will do it secretly here and there and put everybody at risk. If you use your brains and create an area in the underground parking lot or out in the yard or whatever for them to do it, then they'll do it safely and you'll all be happy.
Yes.
So remember that for home grows.
Oh, totally.
All right, Kevin.
Thank you. We definitely want home grow here. I just wanted to add, about 3 years ago, the board commissioned a poll of American, a survey of Americans, and I forget how many thousands of people were actually polled, but 28% of Americans recognize the NORML acronym as a brand, NORML. Of that 28%, about 80% actually know what the acronym stands for, and then there's, what we actually do, it falls off. It's kind of a mystery. One of the things that we can do, talking about that we do as a one-shop stop, is our NORML legal committee has thousands of lawyers across the state. We literally are the first point of contact for anyone who has been arrested for a marijuana crime and or has questions about legalization of marijuana. The calls that I get over the course of a month or a year are a number in the hundreds, and I usually just refer them to people, behind the scenes. NORML's name is not going away, and again, it's one of the most recognizable names, if not the most recognizable names outside of High Times in the whole world in terms of marijuana reform.
I defer my time to my two members here.
I'll add, it's going to take all of us across the board to keep pushing to end it federally, and even though, majority of the people here are in a legal state, it'll take your fighting to help end states that remain illegal. Whether, if you know people across the country, get them active, you don't have to, they don't have to be just locally, because it's going to take us all to end prohibition across the whole board.
Last year wasn't even an election year. It's an election year. Utah, even though they went door to door to try and stop it, voting. Michigan, maybe they can stop locking up grandmas who medical card relapses. Missouri and North Dakota, my favorite, with no money and hardly any organization, they are going to make history. They're going to erase 1 in 15 arrests in North Dakota were for marijuana. Less than 10% of the people, it's the second lowest smoking rate in the nation. Less than 10% smoke marijuana, and yet they made the ballot, they're going to legalize, and when all those states make history and legalize, it's not just the money that they'll save from arrests. It's not just the piece of the $15 billion industry, or like the $1 billion in taxes that Washington's made. It's not just the economic, boom that will happen. It's clear. 1 in 3 opioid overdoses are avoided where marijuana is legalized. There's not a state that can afford prohibition anymore. And this November, we will be the marijuana majority, and we will be deafening, because not one elected political candidate dare say we should go with prohibition a little longer, because it's life and death. So get out there and vote, and NORML will be there to promote it.